Hello and welcome back to another show of From the Field. This is a special we have because the lovely Nick that we have on stream with us is located in the UK, and our normal stream, which is in roughly about 5 hours or so, which we're going to be covering the best practices of building a RAGS application. So if you are interested and you're free in 5 hours and you're not asleep like Nick should be, do feel free to join us again then, because it's going to be great. But today we're going to be talking about how organizational structure is. God, it's too early in the morning and I can't pronounce simple words. How organizational structures and culture impacts the modernization journey. God, that's a mouthful. So, with all ado, why don't we kick it off and go around for a quick round of introductions. If you can actually, do 30 seconds of introduction and explain, business and whatnot. So we'll start with Nick, go to you, Chris, and then Roger will end on you.
Hey everyone. Thanks, Casey. So I'm Nick. I'm based in the UK. Over my 15-year career, I've worked as a developer, tech lead, principal engineer, consultant, and now I'm going back into working for a single company where I'm helping with a big architecture transformation.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Bradley. I'm Head of Enterprise Architecture and Portfolio at 2 Degrees. Like Nick, I've been a developer, a consultant through my career. Spent the last 20 primarily in the telco industry here in New Zealand and in Scandinavia and Europe. Looking forward to talking about architecture modernisation today with Nick and Roger.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. I'm Roger from AWS. I've been with AWS coming up to 2 years, mainly looking after SaaS companies in New Zealand. Prior to that, I've spent about 20 years in the industry working for both startups and enterprises. So modernization is a very common area that we encounter, especially the pains, the challenges. So it's a topic very close to my heart. So yeah, look forward to this session.
Yes, that's 100%. Like, modernization is not a easy ordeal, as we're going to be going through this session. Roger, why don't you kick us off with, what are the overviews of, industry observations you've seen, and just kick us off from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Casey, can you just get the screen up? Thank you so much. Cool. So I'll just pop it over here. So at AWS, we work with a lot of customers. As I said, my own customers involves a lot of SaaS companies. But even beyond that SaaS company segment, we see most of our customers start with conversations with us around technology options to go, hey, AWS, we would like to implement a streaming platform. We would like to implement event-driven architecture, or we would like to break up our monoliths. Can you tell us some patterns, show us some tools, etc., etc. And that's really cool because as technologists, we're bound to face this topic of modernization sooner or later in our career. The thing is, what I wanted to bring up is that one of the insights that really popped up in my head is when I had a recent catch up with a good friend of mine who happened to be a product leader in this space. So she was saying to me, hey, Roger, similar story, you've heard this countless times before. We've got a 25-year-old monolith. We are experiencing a lot of pains, operational issues, incidents, reliability issues, also talent retention and attraction because of the technology we're using. But my challenge is that my peer, the tech leader who's in charge of modernization, is just giving us an answer that we are just going to put in a streaming platform and all the problems going to go away. And so she had this really puzzled look. It's like, how is it going to help me? What that means is that as technologists, I think it's really important that when we face the problem of modernization, we got to be able to connect the business outcome and the technology changes together and be able to articulate that. I think that's the common pattern that we're seeing in the industry. So that's why we're having this conversation.
Awesome. I guess with that, we will go to our expert on the matter. He knows it so well. He did actually write a book on it. If you don't mind a shameless plug, Roger, if you progress the slide. Can you give us, Nick, can you give us more detail on the experiences that led you putting the pen to paper, so to speak, and give a little bit of background on your experiences?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So quite early in my career, I worked on a big modernization project in the UK government around taxes, business taxes, that kind of stuff. And that was a real eye opener for me. In fact, as my career has progressed, I've worked with older and older tech. In my first company, I was doing continuous delivery, deploying to production every day. And then as my career progressed, I got more and more involved in things like mainframes. So I had like a backwards career. But when I worked for the UK government and the business taxes modernization, I don't know the exact age of it, but some people said that the law, the rules, the business process itself had existed for decades, maybe more than 100 years, around how these taxes are calculated. So there's some legacy old software, decades old technologies like Oracle forms and stuff. And whilst a lot of the technology was modernized, moving to event-driven microservices with DDD, I also got to experience a much broader scope modernization, I would say. So we had user researchers in the team. They were going out every week, taking developers with them to talk to real citizens. And we were improving the whole UX. We were improving the domain itself. We had the ability to change business rules. And in the government, the business rules are the law. So we had the opportunity to change the law. And also the domain model is something else that we were changing. When we talk about the domain model, think about how your business concepts are represented in your software, the words you use to describe your business. Over time, as software gets more mature, the way we talk about the business and the way we represent the code, the concepts in code become very different. So it's one language when you're talking about the business, and you have all this effort to figure out which bits of the code are we talking about. So yeah, through my experiences like UK government working at Salesforce, I realized that when you're modernizing, there are different levels or different layers you can modernize that. Yes, we have the software and the infrastructure. We can get big benefits just by using modern technologies. But if we're going to make such a big investment in our legacy systems, also makes sense to think about the UI, the domain model, and also the domain itself.
Nice, awesome. From there, I would actually want to say we heard the lovely Fer in the background, and also your amazing ability to put up with taxes. Tax systems, in my opinion, must be some of the more intricate and boring systems to work on. So good job staying awake there. So why don't we move to Chris, where we can go through his perspective and what led him to decide that the business needed to modernize, and how did he steer his ship through that? And all the viewers at the same time, if you have any questions, do feel free to chuck them into the chat. We're more than happy to be a little bit sidetracked to answer those. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. What led us to modernize? First, I'll tell you a little bit about 2 Degrees and give you some context. In 2022, the 2 Degrees that we know today came together through a merger of 2 great challenger brands here in New Zealand. We are a full stack telco. We offer broadband, mobile, and electricity to our customers. We have coverage of 98.5% to Kiwis, so across the North to South Islands. We have a modern fibre network, we have a modern platform, and we also have 58 retail stores. As you can see by the slide here, we have a footprint across New Zealand where customers can interact with us and go in and check out our services. We have offices across Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch, so our geographical footprint from a development perspective is spread out. We encourage working from home with our teams as well, flexibility of working practices. But really, obviously, the merger was a turning point for us as an organisation when we came together. We had 2, 3, in some cases, 4 of things. So the North Star is to rationalize, simplify that ecosystem, and get all customers into a single system, which we call Tahi, so that we can enhance our customer experience and service offerings. So, yeah, thanks, Casey, for moving forward. Yeah, so that was a real inflection point for us that we had to, accelerate the engine room. We've had a real quick decision point around what our target systems were, but we really kind of needed to break down some of those processes, particularly mobile for us, as we sort of looked to modernize mobile and move that onto our target state platform. Then kind of brought me to a bit of a point where, what are our options? Our CIO is an avid reader, interested in better value, sooner, safer, happier, and team topologies. And through reading those books and doing a little bit of research out on the internet, I came across Nick in my journeys through the ether. And I've always had a bit of an interest in domain-driven design, and likewise with our CIO. And in looking at some of the stuff that Nick was doing online and some of the YouTube clips, I started to dig a little bit deeper and came to know that Nick was actually embarking on a trip down to Australia for IDC. So it was a perfect opportunity to really sort of reach out and ask Nick if he was interested in coming and doing some work with us in a workshop where we could take DDD, use some of the learnings and put some tools in our toolbox to start our sort of modernization journey, and reflect on it in a different way. I mean, we'd really we had started, but it was more around how do we give more tools to our teams to look at the problem differently, so to increase flow and accelerate our business outcomes and to head towards that North Star.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, so I have a question for you here. So earlier we talked about architecture or modernization, and you talked about these challenges. And I'm really intrigued that your approach is not a technology-driven approach. Rather, you're thinking about how to bring the teams together, and you're thinking about creating a workshop with the likes of Nick himself. Can you tell us what went through your head that made you sort of approach this problem this way?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that architecture isn't just about systems and solutions. It's around teams as well. How do you architect your teams to achieve fast flow and your business outcomes? Do we have the right skill sets? Are we using our people in the right way to accelerate those outcomes? Conway's law, you give an outcome to a team, they'll build it based on the skill sets that they have available to them. Now, whether that's actually the right approach to the business, it's good to reflect on that and understand whether, perhaps that piece of work is actually better achieved elsewhere to remove contention, where you might have critical skill shortages and so on. So it really is to step back and look at the problem a little bit differently. With the DDD aspects, again, we weren't experts and we still aren't experts. We're on a journey with respect to domain-driven design, but there are a lot of techniques in there, event storming, process mapping, Wardley mapping, that we could actually use to help understand the problem statement a little bit better and reflect on, do we have our team set up in the right way? Can we, again, look at it differently? It also allows us to bring other parts of the business on that journey, event storming in particular. Nick and I went through what that workshop would look like in the early days, and we had some input from the teams as well. We looked to reflect on a real business case for us as part of our transformation journey. We also then went out and took a cross-section of individuals across the organisation that could come into that room, that session, 3-day session, and provide their perspectives and look to achieve, say, alignment across what we believed was a key scenario that would allow us to bring in not just technical people, but business owners, value owners, CX, to understand that problem space.
Nice. So let's bring this up. I understand these are some photos out of the workshop itself, and it's 3 days across business units, and also having Nick flying all the way to New Zealand. That's really cool, but it's also a pretty big investment for the business. Curious, like, how did you, like, if you were to summarize the key goals that you want to accomplish out of like this 3 days workshop? Pretty big investment. What would you say those key goals are?
That's a great question, Roger. I think the key goal for myself and the business was to one, provide tools to the individuals that were part of that workshop to essentially then be able to go back into their teams and to be that train the trainer type model as well around, what is event storming, what is warning mapping, how can I use it in my day job to become evangelists, but also to have a few realization and aha moments, which we did along the way as well, around, okay, we haven't been necessarily looking at this from a holistic perspective, or someone else had a different perspective that was highly influential once we understood that current state. Not to spend too much time on current state, but current state is a great informer into maybe why there is friction in your journeys today. How do we look to eliminate some of that friction as we look to modernize our architecture? Is it actually the technology? Is it the process? Is it the organizational structures that are wrapped around it, and that socio-technical aspect as well? So the key real goal was is bringing people together with a common purpose to achieve, or help us head towards our North Star with new tools and techniques, Roger.
Nice one. And Chris, you mentioned a couple of techniques there earlier. One of them really jumped out at me. So you talked about domain-driven design and also event storming. So event storming, this is a technique that Nick brought over, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it is, Roger. Yep.
So Nick, maybe this is a really good one for you to take on. Do you mind just giving us a quick overview of what this event storming is all about?
Yeah, sure. Before I talk about event storming, I would just say one of the important aspects of modernization is most of the time it's very sensible not to just rewrite your old system in new tech. I've read various reports and surveys. Some of them suggest that up to 80% of the functionality in your old legacy system is either rarely being used or not being used. There's probably all kinds of workarounds in there. And very often there's spreadsheets and manual processes that you don't even know about that are outside the software. So when we're modernizing, we want to really think about what's the best our future system could be. How can we remove all of the unneeded complexity? And how can we solve business problems more effectively in software that aren't currently being handled in software? And so if we have that problem, one of the tools we need is how can we figure out how the business currently works and how it should work, and find the delta between what's there now and what the ideal future state is. And that's where event storming is very useful. It's useful outside modernization, but incredibly useful in modernization. So what you can see on this diagram here is a neat version. There was a bit more of a messy version we can look at again shortly. But on this neat version, you have a timeline and you have these orange sticky notes. And on those orange sticky notes, you have domain events. And you basically map out your business processes and user journeys using these domain events. Things like order placed, order cancelled, customer onboarded. And we build this timeline. And as you can see on the diagram here, once we've mapped out that timeline, we can then start to chunk it up into domains and subdomains, which becomes our architecture and our team structure. But what's really important and impressive, and I think what gives event storming its true benefit, is in the way in which you construct and you build this timeline. So the workshops formats can vary. The most I've done is 60 people. I think with Chris, we had 20 people, around 15 to 20 people, which is a bit more of a sane number, easy to facilitate when you have around 15, 20. But in that group of people, you have developers, testers, data experts, product people, customer support, sales, and marketing. And so when you build that timeline, you're building a complete picture, not just of what one architect thinks, who's gone around the company and built this based on what he knows or she knows. This is the actual truth of what people know, all put together. And you find out all kinds of assumptions, misassumptions here. I was in a workshop in Canada last year, and one of the salespeople had an 80-step process in spreadsheets, and not a single developer knew that process even existed. So, as I talked about, when we're modernizing, we want to figure out, how does a system really work? Where are the problems and opportunities? How can we improve things? How can we improve that domain model? How can we identify where the language in the software doesn't match how the business talks about things? And event storming can solve all of those problems quite impressively, in my experience.
Is
That's
this
awesome.
also where you would align people in very different part of businesses? Like, let's just say you had an enterprise architect in one end of the business and an SA in another end of the business. Would this be where you'd start aligning people, or is that through different mechanisms?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. That's one of the key points of this technique. So we bring together people who work in different teams to get the end-to-end picture, and we bring together people with different skill sets and backgrounds to get that different perspectives of the same area. But it depends on the scope. Normally, we might map out one line of business, a complete end-to-end journey. We wouldn't map out the whole business. So if they work in completely different parts of the business, that scope might be too big. But you can certainly invite people from other parts of the company to join these workshops, and they'll usually learn a lot.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nick, for giving us a really good overview of what this event storming technique is all about, and some of your experiences. So, Nick, you mentioned that so in this sort of workshop, you involve all kinds of cross-functional teams, and I'm really curious, especially I guess from Chris, your side. This is probably one of the first time you guys run the event storming workshops at 2 Degrees, and having also brought all these different cross-functional teams together. About those insights and aha moments, I was really curious. How did your team find the process, and were there any really interesting insights that you were able to get out of this process?
Yeah, that's a good question, Roger. So yeah, absolutely. Going through the workshop, you could see that the team were actually building an alignment, taking time to understand different perspectives. What we did start to see is that as we did our event storm, some processes that we weren't aware of, or even shadow IT that was going on, were starting to get flushed out as well, which meant we started to get visibility of what parts of the organization were doing in order to provide the outcomes to our organization. And that's just through, sharing the knowledges, sharing their perspectives, and then that collective know-how of the process. And what was clear to us is that not one individual had a clear picture of the entire event storm or the entire end-to-end journey. So it was important to bring that team together so that we could reflect on, why are we doing some of the things that we are doing today? That's a number of different reasons. It can be that we've got high contention in some of our teams, and therefore, stakeholders aren't able to get items onto backlogs, and they look for other avenues to achieve their outcomes. So some of the architecture has become organic over time, rather than through considered architecture or design. And I'm sure people on the call today will reflect on that within their own organisations and go, yeah, that's us as well, where stakeholders aren't able to achieve outcomes, so they look elsewhere in the organisation. And then through discipline and through understanding the organisation better, we can start helping those stakeholders around, where we best look to start to architect. With Shadow IT, we know that dependencies in the organisation can be impacted if it's not actually known about it. As part of the modernisation journey, it's important that we flush that out, especially if we've built critical dependencies on it. And we modernise, and then all of a sudden we've broken something because we didn't realise that something was being done in a corner or a part of the business. Other aha moments were around I'd say that commodity-based, and we'll probably get into there a little bit later in the session around water mapping, but do we buy, do we build as well, as we went through some of the session as well. But it really was around getting people on the same page, that we didn't have, the end-to-end know-how that we thought we had. A little bit, again, heritage around us as an organisation. We're a tech co now. As part of the merger, we develop our own software. In the past, two very different organisations with different approaches to their development or supporting their systems. We have systems that have been vendor-led and supported, and are provided, a really good point-in-time solution for us and driven our business for a long time. But as we've started to modernise and move to our target state where we develop our own BSS, we've also realised that as an organisation we have a heavy reliance on some of those processes, and we have to turn to a vendor to understand what's been done in the past, and that's built to the reliance, and it's a slow flow in some cases as well.
Nice. Thank you, Chris. Look, as a technologist, I'm always intrigued by these new techniques and even these textbook answers. But I think to Nick's earlier point, I don't know about the audience, but I'm really curious to see what this event storming really looks like, that not so clean version. So let's look at this. And the slide is purposely done so you can't read the post-it notes, but you can see some structures there. It's not as clean. So I wonder, Nick, if I can pass this over to you to talk us through what actually happened, and what's happening on this slide, and what's the structures, and what are some of the circles and insights you were able to get out through this session.
Yeah, so what you can see here is the clean and tidy version. It was it looks even more organic than this to begin with. So basically, if you have to facilitate an event storming session, the first part of the workshop is people go crazy. What you want them to do is put as many orange post-it notes on the wall as possible about the things that they work on or things that they know about. Maybe you work in the checkout team, so order placed, that kind of e-commerce stuff. Maybe you work in marketing, so you might have a lead captured or lead acquired events, that kind of stuff. So 15, 20 people, maybe even 60 people, if you've got a huge room, all putting these events on the wall. And your job as a facilitator at that point is really just to encourage them, get as much on the wall as you can. It's like a big brainstorming phase. And then what you do is you start tidying the timeline up, putting things in the correct order, turning it into something that you can read from left to right, start to make sense of. What you can see on this diagram is a technique called pivotal events. So if you look at those big red arrows, you'll see they're pointing to vertical strips. Those vertical strips signify the pivotal events. And a pivotal event is where you have some kind of major milestone or transition in your business process, where one process stops and another process starts, or maybe multiple processes start. So yeah, when an order's placed, the fulfillment journey begins. You might also have a fraud checking process that begins at the same time. And so with these pivotal events, you then get these boundaries, which are good candidates for the boundaries in your software architecture, where one part of the business hands over to another. And those pivotal events are also a good way to start tidying up the event storm. You take every event and say, does it become before this pivotal event or after? And then once you've done that and your timeline is a bit tidier, it's still going to be very messy at that point. You then walk through the timeline from left to right as a whole group together at this point. This can be a very interesting part of the workshop. I try to get different people to talk through different parts of the event storm. So we might say, okay, who wants to talk us through the point up into the first pivotal event? And someone might say, oh, yeah, I work in marketing. I know that part really well. I'll talk through this. And then as you're talking through the event storm, people are asking questions like, oh, what could go wrong here? Is there any other edge cases that we haven't covered here? Why do we do things that way? Is it even necessary to do that? Is there some stuff happening outside software here? So you start to discuss problems and opportunities. And as you can see on the diagram here, there are some red circles. They're looking at these. I think the correct term is fuchsia, the color. It's like a pink, purple, and they're oriented in diamond shape. So your event storm becomes this canvas for how do we find boundaries? How do we put problems and opportunities? Some of those things you can talk about in the moment, and some of them you can come back to later. They're placeholders. Maybe you come back to them after the workshop, but it's a way for everyone to express all those things we touched on earlier about things that can be improved in the new version of the system. Or it could be, we don't know how this works. Either the person who knows about that wasn't in the workshop and we need to get their input, or the other scenario, which happens a lot, is the people who built that don't work here anymore. Nobody knows how that bit works anymore. Unfortunately, we have a loss of knowledge in that area. So yeah, you get all these kind of things that come up. It can be anything, whatever's a problem or opportunity. And then that gives you lots to take into or away from the workshop. Or if you have time, you can actually spend some time during the workshop digging into those problems and opportunities right there, right then, when everyone's available in the room together.
Love it, love it. I really like this approach, Nick. Especially I think as technology leaders or architects ourselves, our instinct is, oh great, I've just joined this company. There's a lot of modernization opportunities. Let me just go and hash out what the domain should look like. Almost like working in a silo ourselves. But this approach allows us to bring multifunctional teams together and come up with a common understanding of where the domain boundary, like what you were saying, those pivotal events, those vertical strips, and so everyone has a common understanding where those boundaries should lie. And then also having a collective mind, we're able to come up with those hotspots, those opportunities, those pink diamond sort of shaped post-it notes over there. So that's really cool. I found this really fascinating, and it's always easier to work in a team than as individuals. So really love this approach. Now my next question is for you, Chris. So 2 Degrees is a pretty big business. You've got almost approaching 2,000 employees. You've got hundreds of different systems or subsystems, many more business processes, as I can imagine. And even put that aside, when I work with some of our customers at a fraction of your scale, there's so many opportunities that we can pick when it comes to modernization, when it comes to perhaps becoming a candidate of this kind of workshop. So the first question popped into my mind is like, the scope is so big. Where do you start? And what made you pick this particular or maybe a couple of particular scenarios as candidate for this workshop? I'm really curious how you made that selection. Was there some sort of North Star that was guiding you?
Yeah, the North Star is always the rationalization of our systems, but we looked at a couple of use cases that were highly cross-functional and touched many parts of the business in order get that cross-functional group together. But in doing that too, that we'd already identified a number of individuals that we thought would be good to be part of this, and again, as our sort of champions of DDD moving forward. But then we gave them the opportunity to reflect on what we thought was actually not what we thought, but what we knew was a real world use case. We had a business outcome that we needed to migrate some functionality off our legacy stack into our new target stack. And as part of that journey, we had an opportunity to look at it differently. Do we need to continue to do some of those things that we're doing today in our target state? Why are we doing them? And then again, the event storm starts to flesh out some of that stuff. As Nick mentioned, it's like we're doing stuff, but we don't necessarily sometimes know why we're doing it, and it can be a trigger point for digging a bit deeper into that. And do we need to then build that functionality? But back to answering your question, Roger, around that North Star, it was around knowing we had to get that into our target system by a particular time frame, and being able to provide that outcome to our customers in a better way, in a more efficient manner than we currently do today. And again, this event storm takes all aspects of the business. It looks at how we interact with the customer and channel. It looks at how our back office functions. We're again interacting with finance, with 3PL. Not to say that we wanted to eat the elephant. It just gave us a really good cross-sectional indication of sort of a workflow. And as Nick again pointed out, we have these pivotal events, and they also then start to allow us to dig deeper into what are our domains and what are our subdomains. So, again, we as an organization have a desire to have autonomous teams or semi-autonomous teams. I think we don't have the luxury to have fully autonomous teams, but having teams that can make decisions around their backlog, their products that they own, the services that they own, means, again, we can have fast flow. This technique allowed us to start to sort of understand where some of those boundaries were even blurred. Is that a domain? Where should it sit? That's where we put those pivotal events, and we started moving the sticky notes left or right a little bit in terms of, actually, that probably should be fit here more logically speaking. And you probably see on the slide deck at the moment, we've got a number of stickies to the far right of it, where we sort of said, right, okay, that's part of our logistics function, and that could actually be potentially grouped and put into its own domain with its own team wrapped about it in the future as well, where they could then manage that backlog and reduce some of that unnecessary communication across the organization, which again, in some cases, slows us down.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think the insight over here, and I really like your approach, Chris. Let me just flick to the next slide. I really like the approach when you were leading the modernization effort at 2 Degrees. You didn't start by talking about, we have to introduce some streaming system, or we have to look at breaking up the monolith, we have to do this and that. Instead, you talked about business outcomes. I think we heard this word quite a lot throughout the session up until now. So it sounded like you were working with the business really, really closely around understanding your business stakeholders, their desires, their desired outcomes from a business standpoint, and then working backwards to go, what are the inputs that needed to feed into the business outcome, your North Star metric. And then it sounded like it was one of those key inputs that you used to select as the key candidate over here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Roger. Yeah. And again, we have a target state platform that we are shifting to. But on that journey, we identify gaps in our capability. Do we leverage our key resources to build, or do we reach out to our partner network to augment our architecture with capabilities that our partner can provide to us? Are all part of that as well. But having that clear North Star of where we're going around our core capabilities and what we're good as an organization helps us also make quick decisions around some of that stuff so we can proceed forward.
Nice one. And Nick, I guess next question is for you. You've worked with a lot of organizations and a lot of modernization efforts, so you're probably very familiar with this framework as well. Could you tell us a little bit of your personal experience using the North Star framework and what needed to be heeded to get this right?
Yeah, definitely. I would say North Stars or some similar kind of business metric and objective, probably one of the most important things to a successful modernization, I would say. And sometimes people who I work with on the tech side don't always grasp why that's important. So, for example, worked with a company in Canada last year, and they got themselves into a situation where they built this spent a year building a new platform and delivered nothing. The CTO who made that decision was no longer at the company. Whether the reasons that led up to that, I don't have all the details, but basically, the company was always talking about moving into new countries and new verticals. They'd been a market leader in one particular vertical, and they were always talking about, let's move into other verticals, into other countries. And the CTO made the decision, what are we doing here? Where's the company going? I'm going to build this super generic platform so that if we ever do move into another country or support other verticals, the platform will be able to handle it. Trying to, build this system that's super flexible to all possible future use cases. So they burned out a year, not delivering much, a couple of teams. They had this architecture that was now much more complex, much more difficult to add features that they did want to add. And because the project was going nowhere, business stakeholders were getting worried. The project didn't even get finished, and someone lost their job over it. So having the key business metrics is crucial. Knowing what you're optimizing for, what you're not optimizing for, what you should go in heavily, and where you can say we don't need to modernize here is super crucial. Some companies are naturally good at that. For those that aren't, I think the North Star metric framework here, this diagram's from Amplitude. This is one from my diagram from my book from the Amplitude North Star framework. Highly recommended. And basically, it provides some guidelines around what a good North Star metric is. So something expresses value. I worked with one company. We were doing a workshop, and we were having that problem of we're not getting clear business outcomes. And I, asking the chief product officer, so what's your North Star metric? Giving him this criteria, and he said, we're special because we delight our customers. And, as we went through this workshop, I kept trying to encourage him to say something more specific. But we couldn't really get anything more specific than we delight our customers as the company's North Star. And so when we were having all these activities around architecture and event storming, and we're asking what's important here, what needs to be modernized, what can we put to one side for now, what's the roadmap for the next 6-12 months, it just was no North Star. Is it around increasing profitability? Is it growth at all costs? Is it moving into new countries and markets? Is it about getting engagement? Is it about moving into different customer segments?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that indicate a good North Star. And then when you have that North Star, you can then think about what are the different inputs that contribute to that. And then different teams will be working autonomously, but they will have their metrics, their inputs that they're working towards, and they know our metrics are contributing to the North Star. So we can be aligned with other teams. And if we achieve our objectives, we know that we are on the right path. So I would say it looks easy. Sometimes people say it's just a metric, but it can be very difficult sometimes. And one thing I would say to technologists is it's not always the case that you go to the business and you say, what's the North Star metric? Like I said, sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they disagree. Sometimes I like to ask devil's advocate questions like, well, your colleague says there's no chance of moving into another country in the next 3 years. And someone will say, no, that's definitely wrong. We're going to be moving into Italy next year. We have to do that, for example. So, as you go through this process, as you try and get people to define this very clear North Star and inputs, you'll realize where there's not alignment, even on the business side.
Yeah. Just to add to that too, we're not modernizing everything in one go. We have a North Star to our vision, and I think it's really key to understand that architecture modernization isn't about trying to modernize everything. It's around taking your opportunities as part of your strategic roadmap to modernize the things that are going to provide the most value and the outcomes that are required on that roadmap at that point in time.
Yeah, 100%. I really like this because it's often, especially in an established organization, it's really easy for us, whether we're working product or technology or just business, it's really easy for us to be just siloed in our own domain and just focusing on what we have to do in our own jobs and not talk to each other, right? So to your point, Nick, getting this North Star, understanding why we're doing certain things, what's the business outcome we're trying to accomplish, that's actually very important, as it's a lot it's a lot easier said than done, right? And I think we also hear this a lot, especially with this hype of generative AI right now. Everyone's jumping into it to go, oh, yeah, okay, what are we doing with generative AI on our roadmap? But I guess the better question, if we were to use this framework to ask, is that what sort of business outcome are we trying to accomplish? And what are some metrics we can put out there to measure our successes? And that would give us a higher chance of success. And even if we're saying this is for experimentation, we can out loud say it and go, what are some of our success metrics, right? So I really like this. I think this really brought out the essence and the spirit of modernization. That is so much more than technology. It's about technology being the enabler for the business success itself.
Yeah.
Love it. So Nick, I guess we've done the workshop. So you were there in New Zealand helping Chris with the workshop 3 days. What do you think would happen after the 3 days workshop to actually turn the workshop insights into actions? Could you tell us a little bit about turning this into actions?
Yep. So firstly, I think this is one of the most important roles, and sometimes this technologists don't always realize, but you have to orchestrate this whole journey. It's project management, it's change management, it's decision making. So you've had this workshop, you've got lots of ideas, and now you have to decide, where do we go next for this particular group of people in this organization and what we're trying to achieve? What is the right next step? Sometimes it might be, let's jump in and build something. Let's try and build something. We've got enough knowledge. Other times it might be, we take this event storm and we have 4 more workshops zooming into each area in more detail. It might be that we switch from current state to future state. It might be that we think about team organization. It might be that we need to get other people involved who weren't involved. So it's a very difficult role. It might be that there's a decision that needs to be made, and that might be your job to think about, how do I design the next workshop where we can bring these people together and get them to make a choice. I think that's always one of the difficult problems. Workshops are great for having ideas, but at some point you have to make a decision and actually start building. So as a technologist, I think if you're like a principal engineer or an architect, yeah, you might need to be thinking, how do I orchestrate this modernization journey? What do I need to do next? So I guess there's a lot of things that can happen next, really. Could be more workshops, could be implementation, could be make a decision. I think if you're ever stuck, my advice is always, do you have a vision of what you're trying to build? You don't need a complete full state target architecture, but you do need to know roughly which direction are we going and what's the next thing we need to focus on. If you don't have those things, I would start there. Try and get the group together and try and map out a vision of, what do you think the target architecture looks like? How confident are we that what we've got is correct? And are we confident enough as a group to start building the first bit? That's always my focus. Enough vision and enough confidence that we can start building. And then whilst you're building the first slice, working towards your vision, you can do more workshops, map out other areas.
Nice. Really love it. Thank you, Nick. So, Chris, it's been, I guess, a couple of months now since Nick's last visit and the workshop itself.
Mhm.
I guess you, in your role, you're kind of in charge of overseeing the future state architecture, the evolution, and also, to Nick's point, how to put things into motion. So, I guess the question to you is, how's the team doing now that a couple of months has passed?
Yeah, we're using event storming, say, in some of the value streams. So the team members that were part of the workshop using that to bring together some of that cross-functional viewpoint, getting people aligned, flushing out some of the stuff that we talked about earlier that we didn't realize that actually we were doing it as a business. And that visualization of it is really key. We used to do a lot of, design type stuff, and especially when we were working like remotely, it was not easy to get everyone on the same page. But like our value owners and our BAs are even using the process design stuff as well to map out the flows. And again, those artifacts are proving very useful to us now as an organization, just as design talking points in terms of, right, okay, this is what we plan on doing, this is how the organization currently executes its process. If we were to change this, could we be actually removing friction from some of the journeys, resulting in a better customer outcome? So again, it just starts to have that whole flow-on effect of driving conversation, but also then driving work into the backlogs for the development teams to execute on. And again, they can connect with it as well in an easier way in terms of this is why we're doing it, because this is driving this outcome for our customers. But back to my earlier point, it's around tools in the toolbox. We're not mandating that our teams have to do domain-driven design. It's around the individual seeing the value and what the techniques and the tools bring to the organization. And those champions are out there using those techniques, and we're starting to see more and more adoption where it's applicable.
Nice. So just looking at the time, I think we're perfectly on time. So yeah, a very lovely photo of the end of the workshop. So I guess I want to just pass this on to each one of you, just I guess as key takeaways for our audiences, whether they are technologists, builders, or perhaps business leaders. So maybe I guess starting off with you, Nick, what would you say some of the key takeaways are to our audiences here?
Yeah, I would definitely say, people are good with technology. But if you really want to be successful with modernization, if you really want to help your company to modernize effectively, then it's about getting people together to map out the current state, design the future state, make important decisions. So I think being able to facilitate is one of the most important skills to work on. Event storming is one technique I would definitely recommend, but once you've learned that, there are others as well, and like those are the most important skills, I think. In addition to sometimes just being able to listen, talk to different people in the business, be able to absorb what's important to them, what challenges they're facing. I would say that facilitation and listening, two of the most important skills.
Nice. Thank you, Nick. What about you, Chris? As a fellow technologist, what would you say the key takeaways are?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Nick just said too there. But I think the event storming allowed us to bring together a really diverse group of individuals with different perspectives, different knowledge across the organization. There were individuals that came into the session skeptical. What is domain-driven design? How's it going to help me in my job, and how's it going to help me manage my stakeholders? I think what this picture shows here is that at the end of the workshop, everyone was highly engaged. They really sort of all came together and took away a lot of value from that 3 days. And positivity, and that this could actually be used to make a difference.
Awesome. We do have one question that came through just before we have to wrap up, because we have another show directly after this in 6 minutes, which is AWS on Air, which if you are interested in learning more about what goes under the hood, definitely do stick around to watch that. But the question to both Nick and Chris is, how do you connect business improvement through understanding the processes to technological improvement through things such as resiliency and performance that might not tie direct to business outcomes?
I think those things do tie to business outcomes for a lot of companies, especially companies that have legacy. When you're going through the event storm, one of the best things you can do is have the customer service team there. Very often in workshops, they can provide you knowledge of support issues, things that take up a lot of time, cost a lot of money to fix that your developers aren't even aware of. So you can go to any event on the event storm or an edge case and say, how many customer support bugs do we get there? How is this affecting our customers? And your developers will say, oh, no, we don't get any bugs in that area. It must be working fine. And your customer support team will say things like, oh, we've had 10 tickets about that this morning already. And so, yeah, involve your customer support. Use your event storm as a canvas to ask questions about these topics for any part of your business, I would say.
Yeah, and also we have a technique internally where we map the critical path. So based on a process, we go, okay, so this is the critical path that has to happen. And if something goes wrong within that path, what is the impact downstream, or what's the impact to the business? So you can start tying, as you alluded to, those monetary disadvantages of, let's just say, if your order platform goes down, you can't take money from people anymore. So that's, something that can be passed directly back to the business for an outcome. With that, I will say thank you, Roger, Nick, and Chris, for coming on today. We do have to wrap up quick smart. So thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And if you do have any more questions or want to reach out and talk to Nick, I'm sure he won't mind you tracking him down through LinkedIn and flicking a question directly to him. Do make use of him. He is awesome. I've really enjoyed talking to him while we've actually been preparing for the stream. So do go over your way for that. And same with you, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll say to our viewers, thank you for coming, thank you for watching. And if you are around in 5 hours, do come back for our stream on how to build a RAG solution. Thank you very much, and Matiwa.
Thank you, team.
Thanks, Ron.